The attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, 7:48 a.m. A sailor looks up at the sky over Hawaii and sees something that doesn't make sense. Planes, dozens of them, but these aren't American planes, and in exactly 2 hours everything will change forever. Before we dive into the story and see what America did to Japan, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell to get all our new videos. What you're about to hear is the story of one of the most devastating surprise attacks in modern history. A single morning that killed over 2,000 Americans and dragged an entire nation into the deadliest war the world had ever seen. This isn't just about what happened that day. It's about how it happened, why no one saw it coming, and the split-second decisions that determined who lived and who died. Because Pearl Harbor wasn't just a battle. It was a catastrophe that could have been prevented. The problem started months before the first bomb dropped. Actually, it started years before, and almost nobody in America knew it was coming. Let's go back to 1941. Europe is already burning. Hitler has conquered most of the continent. Britain is barely hanging on. The Soviet Union is being invaded. And the United States, we're staying out of it. President Franklin Roosevelt wants to help the Allies, but most Americans don't want another war. We already did that in 1917, and tens of thousands of American boys died in the trenches of France. So the attitude is clear. Europe's problems are not our problems. But there's another problem brewing, one that most Americans aren't even paying attention to: Japan. By 1941, Japan has been at war with China for 4 years. They've invaded Manchuria. They've committed horrific atrocities in places like Nanking. And they're not stopping. Japan wants to build an empire across Asia and the Pacific. They call it the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, which sounds nice until you realize it means conquering and controlling millions of people by force. The United States doesn't like this at all, so we start putting pressure on Japan, economic pressure. We cut off their oil supplies, we freeze their assets, we stop selling them the steel and scrap metal they need for their war machine. And this creates a massive problem for Japan because their entire military runs on oil and they don't have any. Without oil, their navy can't move. Their planes can't fly. Their entire war effort collapses. So Japan has a choice. They can back down, pull out of China, and negotiate with the United States. Or they can go to war with America and try to seize the oil fields in Southeast Asia by force. And they choose war. But here's the thing. Japan knows they can't beat the United States in a long war. The American economy is too big. Our industrial capacity is too strong. If this turns into a grinding, multi-year conflict, Japan loses. They know this. Their own military planners know this. So their strategy is different. They're not trying to conquer America. They're trying to knock us out. Hard. Fast. So devastating that the United States decides the Pacific just isn't worth fighting for. They want to destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet in one massive surprise attack, then grab all the territory they need in Southeast Asia before America can recover. By the time we rebuild our fleet, Japan will control the entire Western Pacific. And hopefully, the United States will negotiate a peace deal rather than fight a long, bloody war to take it all back. It's a huge gamble, and the key to the whole plan is Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor is a natural deep-water harbor on the island of Oahu in Hawaii. And by 1941, it's become the home base of the United States Pacific Fleet. Battleships, aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers, submarines. Almost everything we have in the Pacific is stationed there or operates out of there. It's the heart of American naval power in the Pacific Ocean. And that's exactly why Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the commander of the Japanese Combined Fleet, wants to attack it. Yamamoto is not some bloodthirsty warmonger. Actually, he's one of the few Japanese military leaders who thinks going to war with the United States is a terrible idea. He studied at Harvard. He served as a naval attaché in Washington. He understands American industrial power better than most of his colleagues, and he's convinced that Japan cannot win a prolonged war against the United States. But he's a military officer, and his government has decided on war. So if Japan is going to fight America, Yamamoto knows there's only one chance for success. Hit them so hard at the very beginning that they can't respond. Destroy the Pacific Fleet before it can even leave port. And the only way to do that is a surprise attack. Planning begins in early 1941. The man in charge of the operation is Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, but the tactical genius behind it is Commander Minoru Genda. Genda is obsessed with naval aviation. He believes aircraft carriers and planes are the future of naval warfare, not battleships. And he's right. The plan is audacious and risky. A carrier strike force will sail across the North Pacific in complete radio silence, approaching Hawaii from the north where American patrols are weakest. They'll launch 2 waves of aircraft, bombers and fighters, to hit the ships, airfields, and infrastructure at Pearl Harbor. The goal is to sink or cripple as many battleships as possible, destroy aircraft on the ground so they can't fight back, and wreck the repair facilities so the U.S. Navy can't quickly recover. But for this to work, everything has to go right. The fleet has to cross thousands of miles of ocean without being detected. The attack has to achieve complete surprise, and they have to get in, hit hard, and get out before the Americans can organize a counterattack. Through the summer and fall of 1941, the Japanese prepare. Pilots train relentlessly. They practice bombing runs on targets that mimic Pearl Harbor. They study maps and photographs. They prepare special armor-piercing bombs designed to penetrate the thick steel decks of battleships. They even modify torpedoes to work in the shallow waters of Pearl Harbor, which is a serious technical challenge, because normally torpedoes sink too deep after being dropped and would just bury themselves in the harbor floor. And while all this is happening, Japanese diplomats are in Washington negotiating, talking about peace. The whole time, they know the attack is being planned. Some of them don't even know themselves. The Japanese government is playing a double game. Negotiate publicly, prepare for war secretly. By November, the pieces are in place. On November 26th, the Japanese strike force departs from Hitakapu Bay in the Kuril Islands. 6 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, 9 destroyers, 3 submarines, and 8 support ships. It's the most powerful carrier strike force ever assembled up to that point in history. And they're heading for Hawaii. Now here's the thing. The United States isn't completely blind. American intelligence knows something is up. Relations with Japan are terrible. War seems likely. The question isn't if, but when and where. On November 27th, the U.S. military sends out a war warning to all Pacific commands, including Hawaii. It says that negotiations with Japan appear to be over, and that an aggressive move by Japan is expected within days. The warning specifically mentions possible attacks on the Philippines, Thailand, the Malay Peninsula, or Borneo. Notice what's not on that list: Hawaii. Most American military leaders think that if Japan attacks, it'll be in Southeast Asia, closer to their home territory. Hawaii seems too far, too risky. The Japanese would have to sail their fleet thousands of miles across the open ocean without being spotted. It seems impossible. But it's not impossible. It's exactly what they're doing. Lieutenant General Walter Short commands the U.S. Army forces in Hawaii. He receives the warning, and he interprets it as a warning about sabotage, not an air attack. See, Hawaii has a large population of Japanese immigrants and Japanese Americans. Short is worried that if war breaks out, some of them might try to sabotage military installations. So he orders the planes at Army airfields to be grouped together in the center of the runways, tightly packed, so they're easier to guard against saboteurs. This decision will prove catastrophic, because when the Japanese planes arrive, all those American aircraft are bunched together, wingtip to wingtip. They can't be dispersed quickly. They can't take off. They're sitting ducks. Admiral Husband Kimmel commands the Pacific Fleet. He also gets the warning. He takes it seriously, but he doesn't think an attack on Pearl Harbor is likely. The carriers are out at sea on various missions. The battleships are in port, which is normal. It's peacetime routine. Most of the sailors have weekend liberty. Some are on shore leave. It's a normal Saturday night in Hawaii. Meanwhile, the Japanese fleet is getting closer. They're sailing through rough, cold seas in the North Pacific. It's miserable. The ships are pitching and rolling. Sailors are seasick, but they maintain strict radio silence. Not a single transmission. They refuel at sea, which is difficult in bad weather, and somehow they're not spotted. No American patrol planes see them. No ships cross their path. It's incredible luck. On December 6th, the strike force reaches the launch point, about 230 miles north of Oahu. That night, crews prepare the aircraft. Mechanics check engines. Ordnance crews load bombs and torpedoes. Pilots get their final briefings. Everyone knows that by this time tomorrow, they'll either have pulled off one of the greatest military surprises in history, or they'll be dead. In Washington, American codebreakers are reading encrypted Japanese diplomatic messages. The Japanese are using a cipher system called Purple, and the Americans have broken it. On the evening of December 6th, they intercept a long message from Tokyo to the Japanese embassy in Washington. It's clearly the final diplomatic note before war. It doesn't mention Pearl Harbor specifically, but it's clear that Japan is about to break off negotiations. President Roosevelt reads the decoded message and says, "This means war." But where and when? A warning is drafted to be sent to military commanders in the Pacific, but it's Saturday night. The message doesn't go out immediately. There's no sense of urgency, and because of communication delays and lower staffing on the weekend, the warning won't reach Hawaii until after the attack has already started. Everything is coming together for disaster. December 7, 1941, 3:42 a.m. Hawaii time. The Japanese carriers turn into the wind and prepare to launch. It's still dark. The sea is rough but calmer than it's been. Deck crews manhandle aircraft into position. Pilots climb into their cockpits. At 6:00 a.m., the first wave launches. 183 aircraft. 49 high-level bombers, 40 torpedo bombers, 51 dive bombers, and 43 fighters. They form up in the dark sky and turn south toward Oahu. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida leads the attack. He's in the lead bomber. As the sun rises, he can see the island ahead. The sky is clearing. It's going to be a beautiful morning, perfect weather for an attack. At 7:02 a.m., a U.S. Army radar station at Apana Point on the northern tip of Oahu picks up a large formation of aircraft approaching from the north. The radar operators, Privates Joseph Lockard and George Elliott, have never seen anything like it. The radar scope shows more than 50 aircraft, but the system can't tell exactly how many. They call it in to the information center at Fort Shafter. The officer on duty, Lieutenant Kermit Tyler, isn't worried. He knows that a flight of B-17 bombers is expected to arrive from California that morning. He assumes that's what the radar is picking up. He tells Lockard, "Don't worry about it." It's one of the most consequential mistakes in American military history. At 7:48 a.m., the first Japanese planes appear over Pearl Harbor. Fuchida looks down and can't believe what he sees. The entire Pacific Fleet is there. Battleships lined up in neat rows along the southeast shore of Ford Island. They call it Battleship Row. 8 battleships, the backbone of American naval power in the Pacific, all sitting there with no smoke coming from their stacks. They're not ready to move. There are no barrage balloons, no heavy anti-aircraft fire, no fighter planes rising to intercept. Fuchida radios back to the fleet. "Tora, Tora, Tora, Tiger, Tiger, Tiger." The code phrase meaning they've achieved complete surprise. And then the bombs start falling. The first target is the airfields. Japanese fighters and bombers sweep over Wheeler Field, Hickam Field, Ford Island, and other installations. Strafing runs tear through rows of parked aircraft. Bombs crater runways. Hangars explode. Within minutes, most of the U.S. Army Air Force's planes in Hawaii are destroyed or damaged on the ground. The few pilots who manage to reach their aircraft find them perforated with bullet holes, engines shot out, fuel tanks ruptured. Second Lieutenants George Welch and Kenneth Taylor are two fighter pilots who were out late the night before at a party. They're still in their tuxedos when the attack starts. They race to Haliwa Field, a small auxiliary airfield that the Japanese don't hit. They manage to get airborne in P-40 fighters and actually shoot down several Japanese planes. But they're exceptions. Most American pilots never get off the ground. At Pearl Harbor itself, the torpedo bombers come in low and fast. They're skimming just above the water, so low that their propellers almost touch the harbor. They launch their torpedoes at Battleship Row. The USS Oklahoma is hit by 3 torpedoes in rapid succession. Water floods in. The ship starts to list. Then 4 more torpedoes hit. The Oklahoma rolls over. It capsizes in less than 12 minutes. Over 400 men are trapped inside the overturned hull. Some of them will survive in air pockets for days, banging on the hull, waiting for rescue that comes too late for most. The USS West Virginia takes 6 or 7 torpedoes. Massive explosions tear open her hull. The ship starts to sink. Captain Movan Bunnan is mortally wounded on the bridge. Fire spreads, but damage control teams manage to counterflood the ship, allowing her to settle upright on the bottom instead of capsizing like the Oklahoma. This saves many lives. The USS California takes 2 torpedoes. She's flooding and sinking, settling into the mud. The USS Nevada is hit by 1 torpedo. Her crew manages to get the engine started. They decide to make a run for it to get out of the harbor and into open water. It's an incredibly brave decision. The Nevada is the only battleship that even tries to get unquad during the attack. But as the Nevada starts moving, the Japanese see it. Every bomber in the sky turns toward her. They don't want the Nevada to escape. They want her to sink in the harbor channel. If she goes down there, she'll block the entire harbor. No ships will be able to get in or out for weeks or months. Bombs rain down on the Nevada. She's hit again and again. The ship is on fire. The forward deck is a sheet of flame, but she keeps moving. Her crew beaches her at Hospital Point to avoid sinking in the channel. It's a desperate, heroic act that saves Pearl Harbor from being completely bottled up. And then there's the USS Arizona. At UT, Zura Sux AM, a 1,760-pound armor-piercing bomb, dropped from a high-altitude bomber, punches through the Arizona's forward deck. It penetrates deep into the ship and detonates in or near the forward ammunition magazines. The explosion is cataclysmic. Over 1 million pounds of gunpowder explodes at once. The entire forward part of the ship erupts in a massive fireball that rises hundreds of feet into the air. The force of the explosion is so powerful that it lifts the 33,000-ton battleship out of the water. Men on other ships miles away feel the shockwave. The blast is so bright that it's visible from the other side of the island. The Arizona sinks in 9 minutes. 1,177 men die. Most are killed instantly by the explosion. Some are trapped below decks as the ship goes down. Others are blown into the water, covered in burning oil, and drown or burn to death. It's the single greatest loss of life on any ship in the attack. The harbor is chaos. Ships are sinking. Some are on fire. Thick black smoke pours from burning fuel oil. The water is covered in flames. Men are jumping overboard, swimming through fire. Small boats race around, pulling survivors out of the water. Anti-aircraft guns are finally starting to fire back, but it's too little too late. At 55 AM, the first wave ends. There's a brief lull. Damage control parties scramble to fight fires and plug leaks. Rescue teams pull wounded men from wrecked ships. Sailors dive into burning water to save their shipmates. Stories of heroism are everywhere. Messman Doris Miller, an African-American sailor on the West Virginia, carries wounded men to safety and then mans an anti-aircraft gun, shooting at Japanese planes even though he's never been trained on the weapon. He'll later receive the Navy Cross. At noon, 00 a.m., the second wave arrives. 171 aircraft. More bombers, more dive bombers, more fighters. They hit targets that were missed in the first wave. They pound the already damaged ships. They strafe anything that moves. But this wave doesn't have it as easy. Now the Americans are awake and fighting back. Anti-aircraft fire is much heavier. The second wave loses more aircraft. And because most of the high-value targets from the first wave are already destroyed or sinking, the second wave achieves less despite taking more losses. By noon 45 a.m. it's over. The last Japanese planes turn north and fly back to their carriers. Behind them, Pearl Harbor is a scene of devastation. Thick smoke rises thousands of feet into the air, visible for miles. Ships are burning, sinking, capsized. The harbor is littered with debris and oil slicks. Bodies float in the water. When Commander Fuchida flies back over the harbor to assess the damage before returning to the carriers, he can hardly believe what he sees. It's total destruction. The butcher's bill is staggering. 4 battleships sunk: the Arizona, Oklahoma, California, and West Virginia. 4 battleships damaged: the Nevada, Tennessee, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. 3 cruisers damaged. 3 destroyers sunk or heavily damaged. Nearly 200 aircraft destroyed. And the human cost is even worse. 2,403 Americans killed. 1,178 wounded. In less than 2 hours. It's the deadliest attack on American soil until September 11, 2001, 60 years later. But here's the thing. As devastating as the attack is, it could have been worse. And in some ways, it's not as successful as the Japanese hoped. The American aircraft carriers are not in port. The Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga are all at sea on various missions. They're the most valuable targets, and the Japanese miss them completely. This turns out to be crucial, because it's those carriers that will form the core of the American counterattack in the coming months. Also, the Japanese don't hit the fuel storage tanks. There are massive above-ground fuel storage tanks on the hills around Pearl Harbor, holding millions of gallons of oil. If those had been destroyed, the Pacific Fleet would have been crippled for months, unable to operate because there'd be no fuel. But the Japanese don't target them. And they don't hit the repair facilities. The dry docks, the machine shops, the repair yards, all of that survives relatively intact, which means the U.S. Navy can start salvaging and repairing damaged ships almost immediately. In fact, of the 8 battleships hit, 6 will eventually be repaired and returned to service. Only the Arizona and Oklahoma are total losses. The California, West Virginia, Nevada, Tennessee, Maryland, and Pennsylvania will all fight again. But none of that matters on December 7th. What matters is that America has just suffered a shocking, humiliating defeat, and the nation is about to change forever. The news hits the mainland like a thunderbolt. Radio broadcasts are interrupted. Families gather around radios, stunned. President Roosevelt is in the White House, receiving updates. He's shocked, but also, according to some accounts, almost relieved. The debate about whether America should enter the war is over. Japan has made the decision for everyone. On December 8th, Roosevelt addresses a joint session of Congress. His speech is short. Just over 6 minutes. It begins with the most famous line. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. He asks Congress to declare war on Japan. The vote is 470 to 1. The single dissenting vote comes from Representative Jeanette Rankin of Montana, a pacifist who also voted against entry into World War I. 3 days later, Germany and Italy, Japan's allies in the Tripartite Pact, declare war on the United States. Now America is fully in the war, both in the Pacific and in Europe. The isolationist movement collapses overnight. The entire country mobilizes. And the American public is furious. The surprise nature of the attack, the fact that it happened while Japanese diplomats were still negotiating in Washington, strikes Americans as treacherous. Remember, the Japanese delivered their declaration of war to the U.S. State Department after the attack had already started, because of translation and communication delays at the embassy. So from the American perspective, Japan attacked without warning, without a declaration of war. It's seen as a sneak attack, a stab in the back. This perception drives American determination for the rest of the war. The phrase, "Remember Pearl Harbor," becomes a rallying cry. Recruitment offices are flooded with volunteers. Industries retool for war production. Within months, the United States is building ships, planes, and tanks at a rate the world has never seen. For Japan, Pearl Harbor is a short-term tactical success but a long-term strategic disaster. They succeeded in damaging the Pacific Fleet and buying themselves time to conquer Southeast Asia, but they failed to knock the United States out of the war. They didn't sink the carriers. They didn't destroy the infrastructure. And most critically, they united the American people in a way nothing else could have. Before Pearl Harbor, America was divided about the war. After Pearl Harbor, the entire nation was committed to total victory. Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of the attack, supposedly said afterward, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Whether he actually said those exact words is debated, but the sentiment is accurate. Japan started a war with a nation that had 10 times its industrial capacity, and Pearl Harbor gave that nation the motivation to use every bit of that capacity to achieve total victory. The road ahead is long and brutal. The Battle of Midway 6 months later, island-hopping campaigns across the Pacific, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, the firebombing of Japanese cities, and finally, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, all of it traces back to this one morning in Hawaii. Pearl Harbor also has a profound effect on American military thinking. The idea that America is safe behind its oceans, protected by distance, dies on December 7th. The military learns hard lessons about intelligence, preparedness, and the danger of surprise attack. These lessons shape American defense policy for the rest of the 20th century and beyond. For the people who were there, Pearl Harbor is something they never forget. The sailors who survived the Arizona, the pilots who fought back, the nurses who treated the wounded, the civilians who watched the attack from their homes. It marks them forever. Many of the survivors return to Pearl Harbor for memorial ceremonies every December 7th until they're too old to travel. Some request to have their ashes interred on the Arizona with their shipmates who died that day. The USS Arizona Memorial is built over the sunken wreck of the battleship. It's one of the most visited sites in Hawaii. Over 1 million people visit every year. The ship is still there, resting on the bottom of Pearl Harbor with over 900 men still entombed inside. Oil still leaks from the wreck, rising to the surface in small droplets. People call them the tears of the Arizona. December 7, 1941 is one of those dates that changes everything. Like September 11th, everyone who was alive remembers where they were when they heard the news. It's a dividing line in American history, before Pearl Harbor and after Pearl Harbor. The attack transforms the United States from a reluctant bystander to a global superpower fully committed to defeating fascism. It's the moment when America truly enters the 20th century as a world power. And it all happened in less than 2 hours on a Sunday morning in paradise, when the first bombs fell on Battleship Row, and the world changed forever. The sailors and soldiers at Pearl Harbor that morning didn't ask for war. Most of them were just kids, 18, 19, 20 years old. They were doing their jobs, serving their country in peacetime, and suddenly they were thrust into combat without warning, without preparation. Many showed incredible courage. Some panicked. Most just did their best to survive and help their friends. Their sacrifice is why we remember, not just because of the ships that were sunk or the planes that were destroyed, but because of the people. The 2,403 Americans who died that day. The youngest was 17. The oldest was 62. They came from every state in the Union. They were sons, brothers, husbands, fathers, and they died in an attack that most of them never saw coming. Pearl Harbor is a story of failure and heroism, disaster and resilience. It's a reminder that history can turn on a single day, that preparedness matters, that vigilance is not paranoia. It's also a reminder of what people are capable of, both terrible and inspiring when the stakes are highest. The attack succeeded in its immediate goals but failed in its ultimate purpose. Japan wanted to scare America into backing down. Instead, they ignited a fury that wouldn't stop until the Japanese Empire was completely defeated. The attack that was supposed to keep America out of the war instead guaranteed Japan would lose it. That's the paradox of Pearl Harbor. The greatest tactical surprise in naval history led to one of the greatest strategic blunders. And the course of the entire war, the entire 20th century really, was shaped by what happened in those 2 hours. When the smoke cleared and the fires were finally put out, when the wounded were treated and the dead were counted, America was a different country. The age of innocence was over. The sleeping giant was awake, and the world would never be the same. If you want to see what happened next in the Pacific War, check out the next video.